go into, all right, so this last half will be injury recovery and then sleep strategies. So injury recovery, like, okay, so the reality is like probably at some point in your career, you will get injured or you will be kind of recovering from an injury or having some kind of maybe some nagging like side effects of having said injury. So I kind of thought, because I had a lot of questions about inflammation and like how to address some of this stuff, that I would kind of dive into this recovery piece. And I'm not really going to do the sciencey part of it. Like, I mean, I will a little bit, but like I want to be more like realistic and like have some actual tips that seem reasonable. So with that, light duty. Now, I know I'm not talking to, all structural or even I'm talking to some civilians, but the reality is for some of our structural firefighters or even some wildland, you may have to go on light duty at some point in your career due to an injury or for some of our females for a pregnancy. And these are kind of my 3 big tips. I did a post on this I need to repost this in the next few weeks. I did a post on this on Instagram a couple months ago, but these are some of my biggest tips when I'm working with a first responder who just went on light duty. Number 1, and I consider this number 1 again, is consider talking to a therapist, because going to light duty can be really hard for some people and in a way that they just weren't expecting. Like some people are like, oh, I got injured. Okay, like I'll just, get the surgery and then I'll recover and I'll be fine. But the reality is with light duty is, 1, first responders in my experience have never done well on light duty. Like it's just really hard, while they may be sleeping every night, but working 5 days a week of day work, their commute might be really long. It also drains you in like a completely different type of way. And a lot of times people just want to get back to that 24-hour shift or 48-hour shift or whatever that normal is to them. Plus, they kind of lose that camaraderie of their shift. So they may not fit as well or feel like they fit as well with whoever they're working with on their light duty assignment. They may not like their light duty assignment. And it's a lot of stress on top of when you're
Hey,
yes.
Megan, real quick. Sorry, something just popped up and it said the recording is set to expire. I'm not sure if you had to extend the time on it or not. It's showing
No,
up.
I stopped it and restarted it to try and make the cutting easier.
Okay, that's fine.
Let me just double check. Yeah, no, that's probably smart because you know how technology has been treating us. Yeah, it says recording it's recording. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
Yep, it's recording. No, yep, sorry about that. Okay, so where was I going with all that? Right there I am. So with that, a lot of times, like getting injured as a first responder, and especially as an active first responder who likes exercise, is also really hard. So sometimes talking to someone can really help you troubleshoot some of that stuff. The other parts, some other tips for light duty. Typically, when you are in a light duty assignment, you're probably less mobile. So that means your calorie burn can be actually quite significantly lower than compared to especially if you had a busier shift. So if you were running like 10, 15 calls a day, plus doing housework and stuff like that, trainings, drills, whatever, that's a significant amount of physical activity, typically around 20,000 steps a day, sometimes for those busier stations. And now you're suddenly doing 1,000 steps a day at an office job. So that's where we have to kind of cut back on portions and snacks and stuff like that. And that can be hard because sometimes, again, when you're in these light duty assignments, maybe they don't give you all the work that you need to get done and you're just kind of bored, and it's a lot easier to just kind of sit and snack. So we do have to kind of be more mindful about that snacking and portion control because of that change. A quick note for my pregnant females or my females who may be considering pregnancy at some point in their career. Another thing to note is that when you do pull out for pregnancy, right, typically it's usually done in the 2nd or 3rd trimester. And typically for the 2nd and 3rd trimester, we would increase calories by 300 and then 500 calories respectively. And what happens is if I pull a female from a busier house and now they're on light duty, they actually may not need that calorie increase because they actually lost that activity. So that is a specific note for our female firefighters out there. So especially if they feel like they're gaining weight faster than they wanted to, or their gynecologist wanted them to. The other big thing to focus on for light duty for injury management in general is going to be getting that 125 ounces of fluid per day, ideally mostly water. And then also adding walking in when possible. Now, of course, if you're on crutches or something like that, you don't have to worry about that necessarily. But these are some of my biggest tips, again, for light duty. Now, what is the purpose of nutrition for injury recovery? So what you eat is going to directly impact how quickly and how well you recover from whatever injury you're dealing with. Now, there are specific nutrient needs and differences depending on the types of injuries and that kind of thing, and I'll explain that shortly. But typically, we're trying to control inflammation. We're trying to rebuild your injured tissue. We're trying to minimize muscle atrophy, which for my lifters, like if you've ever been injured, it's like a shot to the heart, especially if you hurt a leg and now you notice that one quad is like smaller than the other quad or one calf is smaller than the other calf, you get it back. But again, the nutrition piece can help minimize some of that muscle atrophy. And then it can also help you preserve strength and power, which is particularly important now. I don't know if you all do, like we do work performance, so you have to, go through this obstacle course before you're cleared to go back to duty. But that is super important, preserving that strength and power, because we want you to get back to your shift work as fast as you can so you can be back with your shift and, not cranky on light duty anymore. Now, with that, when people get surgeries, and maybe you didn't think I was going to get this deep into it, but I think this is important to note because typically you will experience surgery or you will know someone currently or in the future who will be experiencing some sort of surgery, no matter what it's for. And some of the common nutrition challenges around surgery, no matter which one it is nausea, constipation, and then antibiotic use, which could lead to the need for probiotics. So nausea, if people are nauseous after surgery, typically we're giving them the kind of blander foods, the banana, rice, applesauce, toast kind of thing. We're trying to get them to eat small and frequent meals. A lot of times we also try and do nutrient dense beverages. So things like smoothies. If they'll do kombucha, we'll do kombucha, especially because that'll give a probiotic. So to mitigate that nausea, it's that frequent meals. A lot of times after surgery, people just don't have an appetite. But while it may be like, okay, well, I need to have portion control because I'm not moving, that first week after surgery, your calorie needs are going to be significant just because you are recovering from a surgery. The other side of it too is crutches increases calorie needs as well. So if you're crutching around because of some sort of leg injury or something like that, it does increase your calorie needs as well. Do I think you need to, the biggest thing is trying to choose nutrient dense foods and not calorie dense foods. So calorie dense foods is all the fun things that you want to eat when you're, watching TV or something or recovering from an injury. Nutrient dense foods are foods that are relatively low in calories, but high in vitamins, minerals, protein, those kinds of things. And those are what we're trying to eat more of. Another problem that we see typically after surgeries, it's usually a result of the anesthesia and then also maybe some of the painkillers that you might be on. Constipation is a big issue. The biggest thing is making sure you're getting enough fluid and enough fiber. Yep, we're back to the fiber. But typically, when your bowels aren't moving, the big three that we're focusing on is fluid, fiber, and movement. Right after surgery, typically people are not being recommended to move. Depends on the surgery, actually, for hips and knees. Sometimes they want you moving. But so trying to get more fluid and fiber. And the quick tip for that we use in all the nursing homes is hot prune juice, which sounds as delightful as it is. It doesn't taste that bad. But for whatever reason, heating up beverages, so hot coffee or tea, hot prune juice with some fiber can actually get things moving if you're stuck. Kiwis are also shown to help with constipation. And then also, if you have to, you may want to do some sort of supplement. And the supplement that I recommend for constipation is Benefiber. I recommend getting it in the little travel packets. You can get it in big, massive tubs. I recommend spending the money on the travel packets because the tubs, it's a fine powder. It gets everywhere, and it's hard to remember to use it compared to having a little portable pack. But again, fiber in a hot liquid tends to help with that stuff. Now, of course, sometimes if you're really backed up, it's been several several months of you being constipated, then a doctor may recommend magnesium. I think it's magnesium citrate. And then that is the stuff that comes in a bottle and it tastes horrible, but it does the job. And the other thing would be Miralax. Again, typically people will try, it's a little bit softer, less aggressive if we do, the fluid and fiber. But if the fluid and fiber aren't working, then we got to go to something a little bit stronger. The last thing that, again, if you're using antibiotics for the surgery or for whatever reason, if you have some sort of bacterial infection or something like that, then typically the antibiotics will wipe the bad bacteria, but sometimes it can also wipe the good bacteria, and that can cause long-term issues. So typically we want to try and replace that, again, via food. You can do this like through probiotic supplements. But the challenge with probiotic supplements is typically keeping the bacteria alive is the hard part. So it might have the bacteria, but if all the little bacteria are dead, they're not going to suddenly come back alive, through your GI. So again, we're trying to do this through food. Probiotics are actually the live bacteria, and this is found in fermented foods like yogurt, kombucha, sauerkraut, miso, and kimchi. Again, you don't want any of these to be heat treated. So if you're jarring sauerkraut through heat or canning sauerkraut through heat, typically that does kill off a lot of the little bacteria. So you kind of want that to be fresher, which is harder to find. Prebiotics. Now, prebiotics are the little foods that the bacteria eat. And that includes things like onions, garlic, asparagus, oats, wheat, mushrooms are typically higher in prebiotics. So again, trying to get some of those foods in. Kombucha has gotten really popular. I don't know if any of you have tried kombucha. It's if you've ever tried to brew it yourself, I used to back in the day when I was a young dietitian interested in all this weird stuff. It actually comes like with a bacterial disc, and you put it in a jug of sweet tea, and the bacteria ferments all the little sugar in there and creates prebiotics, and then you add a little bit of juice for flavor. Now, of course, you can buy this on the market. It's kind of like a fizzy, has a little bit of a sour taste to it, but not as bad as it sounds. So that, sometimes I recommend kombucha, like if you have a little bit of a lag in the afternoon, because it can be pretty tart, sour, and sweet at the same time, and it gives you a little bit of a kick in the pants, but it does not come with any caffeine. So, it's not going to do what caffeine can do. Now, keep in mind if you are sober, kombucha is fermented. It may have a very, very, very minor alcohol content, but if you're avoiding that, then I wouldn't recommend kombucha. All right, so what are the food choices that we're going to emphasize? Well, it doesn't change much from the day to day, right? So I think at some point I mentioned a protein in a plant. If I was going to summarize nutrition down to one little adage is if you get a protein in a plant at every meal, you're probably doing better than 90% of the population. So protein, the biggest thing that we're looking for ideally is the amino acid leucine, which can help with muscle protein synthesis, important for the gains or like bodybuilding, muscle building, that kind of thing, but also recovery after an injury. Again, we're looking at about 20 to 35 grams of protein every 3 to 5 hours. So spreading that protein intake throughout the day is going to be important. So a lot of times the biggest challenge for people is getting protein at breakfast, like for most Americans, unless you're doing eggs or something like that. But again, trying to spread that protein throughout the day. Where this gets tricky is if you have a leg injury or some sort of injury where it suddenly gets hard to cook and you're living at home by yourself or something like that, you don't have someone to help take care of you, it can be harder to get this protein in than it sounds, right? So what I recommend, it is getting a little bit easier now. There are meal delivery companies. I think we talked about this and someone told me of one in California and I already forgot what it was. We have one called Mighty Meals, Territory, Factor. They are meal delivery companies. They're like HelloFresh, but instead of them delivering the food and making you put it together, it comes in a pre-made meal prep container that's just heat and eat. So my recommendation now, while it's not cheap, it's not that expensive. Most of the ones near us, it's about $10 a meal, which $10 a meal for fast food is actually cheap. For Grubhub, it's dirt cheap. However, if you're a meal prepper and you cook all your meals and you have 4 kids or something, that's expensive. So, again, maybe while you're injured or the week or two after surgery, it might be good to do one of those meal prep services, just so you're getting a balanced meal with the protein, veggies, and omega-3s, the fruits and the veggies. Again, the antioxidants is the super important part with the recovery piece. So some antioxidant-rich foods. Now, pretty much any fruit and vegetable is going to have a lot of antioxidants, right? But if I was going to describe some high antioxidant content, we've got blueberries, tart cherries, pecans, artichoke, cranberries, blackberries, green tea, pineapple, turmeric, ginger, dark chocolate. So some ways to get these things in. You could do some smoothies. You could do some curries, stir fries. Obviously, salads are great too. Some nuts and seeds as snacks or nuts and seeds in your salad. So really trying again to push that not plant-based, but the plant-focused kind of diet, which is hard when you're sitting on your butt and you're bored, right? So the last one we talked about, omega-3s. Omega-3s are particularly important. They're general and anti-inflammatory, but if you have a head injury or a concussion, there are actually omega-3 protocols because there's been several case studies that have shown that omega-3s, if implemented pretty early on in relatively high doses, that they could actually mitigate some of the long-term symptoms of concussions. Also, having a protein source. Usually they consider this when an athlete is pulled from play. For first responders, I don't know when that typically happens, but as soon as you have some sort of head injury where you're concerned about it, is having some protein pretty like within an hour after may help with symptoms down the line. The challenge is once you've bonked your head pretty hard, like sometimes that changes people's appetites. Some people are they're nauseous, they're throwing up. Do your best when you can. Same thing with omega-3s that can help with the concussions. There is a protocol, but again, you want to work with a physician because it's in really like some up to 12 of those fish oil pills a day or more. And again, you want to work with a physician because of the blood thinning and some of the other things. All right, so what should we reduce? Well, everything fun. So one of the big things that can inhibit recovery after an injury, after a surgery, is alcohol let me clarify, alcohol in large amounts. So large amounts of alcohol can exacerbate muscle loss when immobilized. So if you're drinking a lot after, you've had some sort of surgery and your muscles are kind of immobilized, knee surgery, hip surgery, those kinds of things, shoulder surgery. And it can also impair muscle building during that recovery process. Now, what is excessive alcohol intake classified as? So for men, that's 4 drinks per day or more than 14 drinks per week. More than 14 drinks per week. For women, that's more than 3 drinks per day or more than 7 drinks per week. A drink is a serving, so that is 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, which if you've ever measured out 5 ounces of wine, it's absolutely devastating, especially in the wine glasses that you can purchase at the store. And then 1.5 ounce of spirits. So that includes things like whiskey, bourbon, those kinds of things. So really kind of small amounts. So, granted, I've gone to a couple conferences with first responders, maybe a little bit of a different scenario, but I have seen how quickly those drinks can add up. So again, especially if you are recently injured or you're concerned with recovery specifically, that excessive alcohol intake is something to pay attention to and to curb back on. It's not just the calorie concern with that, but it's also the fact that alcohol, again, can inhibit or worsen muscle loss when you're immobilized due to an injury. The other thing too is like the empty calories or simple carbohydrates. So when I say empty calorie foods, these are high calorie foods that don't come with a lot of nutrients. So like anything delicious, sweets, fried foods, baked goods, fatty meats, processed meats, where it comes with like a lot of calories, but it doesn't come with like a lot of nutrients like protein, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, and those kinds of things. Now, let me make this really clear. And in the corner, it says reduce, not eliminate. And the reason I put that on the slide is, again, a lot of times first responders really black or white, right? So when you're really black or white, sometimes what you hear is like, okay, I need you to cut back on alcohol, cut back on empty calories. And that like, oh, we're not allowed to have that at all. And it's more of just pulling back on those things. I did try to give some quantities there so you have an idea of like what is considered too much, but you can still have a drink at dinner if you want to have like one drink. Again, maybe measuring it. A lot of times when I'm working with first responders and they're like looking at their alcohol and like, okay, maybe this is higher than I thought. We start with measuring it out, actually measuring like the vodka or whatever, the tequila in a shot glass and then mixing it into the drink, actually measuring out wine or beer and then putting it into the glass so that they have an idea of what serving sizes actually look like. But it doesn't mean you have to cut it out entirely. Like having one drink is going to blow your muscle losses or muscle gain when you're recovered or you're recovering, but it is something to pay attention to. And I had a specific question from Pearl about tendon and ligament injuries. Now, I have this really good nutrition for injury recovery. And a sports dietitian wrote it. It's about 4 pages long, and it has a couple like little meal plans like this. So this is not my meal plan. It came from that. I added it to the Google Drive so that Ryan and Pearl could get that out to you so you can have that on hand. And it has a bunch of pictures and graphics on how to improve your nutrition after recovery. Now, the interesting thing with tendon and ligament injuries, so all of the stuff that I already talked about, cutting back on alcohol, cutting back on, the empty calorie foods, more fruits, more vegetables, more protein, that's all relevant still. But an interesting thing that you could potentially add is 15 grams of gelatin. Yes, gelatin. And like the stuff you make Jello out, not Jello, just like the stuff you make Jello out of, and 50 milligrams of vitamin C. So in normal people language, that is 2 gelatin packets, like food grade gelatin packets. You can actually buy it. It's right next to the Jello in the grocery store, and 8 ounces of orange juice before training or before physical therapy. So you just mix that in and then drink it back. Now, the longer you let it sit, the thicker it's going to get. So, you might have to kind of chug that back. And then you can see this kind of meal plan. It's showing higher fiber diet with lots of fruits and veggies. Typically rehab being in the morning for this person, some protein. We're going to talk about tart cherry juice in a minute. Turkey sandwich for lunch, smoothies as a snack, really trying to pack the nutrient profile into this. So again, if you're kind of having some lagging issues for tendon and ligament injuries, that is something to go back to the physical therapist and talk to them about. But again, if you're trying to, gelatin has helped outcomes for those with these specific injuries, particularly around training. So that could be something that you could try. And it's food-based, which I prefer food-based compared to supplements because, again, the supplement industry typically is not as well regulated. Tart cherry juice, which I just mentioned. So tart cherry juice. So just to be specific, there's regular cherry juice, there's sweet cherries, and there's tart cherries. But tart cherries have a specific polyphenol called anthocyanins, which is an antioxidant that is specifically anti-inflammatory. So tart cherry juice or tart cherries would be high in fiber. The juice is not going to be high in fiber. They're high in vitamin C, and they're also high in potassium. So they have a bunch of other vitamins and minerals in there that are important. But tart cherry juice specifically is particularly important for recovery, delayed onset muscle soreness or DOMS, and potentially sleep in both older adults and younger adults, which is kind of the first responder population. So the reason I like tart cherry juice is because it's not a supplement. It's actually something like you can get the Ocean Spray tart cherry juice from the grocery store. Typically this isn't like, how most juices like orange juices, pineapple juice, like it's in the refrigerator section. This is going to be in like the soda aisle with all the other like cranberry juices and stuff like that. Very high in antioxidants, tart cherry juice is. It kind of it's tart. It's got a little bit of a weird flavor to it, but basically what the dose would be is 8 to 12 ounces 2 times a day. So this will help you with muscle recovery or from your workouts and potentially shift work. I don't know about shift work recovery. I don't have research, but I'm kind of extrapolating a little bit here. It can also potentially help with sleep quality. So again, so you would do 8 to 12 ounces in the morning or around your workout, especially if it's a morning workout, and then 8 to 12 ounces 1 to 2 hours before bed. So that may help with improving sleep quality. Now, Bundy is a popular brand that specifically, I think, focuses mostly on tart cherry juice and different products that contain tart cherry. They have a tart cherry concentrate. So this was what I was thinking, maybe more for my wildland people or even just busy structural firefighters, would be the concentrate, because the concentrate you could just get away with 1 ounce in the morning and 1 ounce in the evening, and the packets are really small. So if you are on some sort of deployment, it's, a 14-day, 2-week or more deployment, it's not going to take a ton of space up in your bag relative to taking like the full juice. So again, you could maybe go with one of those concentrates for some of those deployments, or having them on hand for when you're on shift. Maybe you do the juice when you're at home and then you do the concentrate when you're at work. Now, of course, there's going to be a little bit of a price hike for the little packets, but it could be something that's a little bit more portable. And then we also have Bundy also has a sleep formulation. Now, this does not just have tart cherry juice. It also has L-theanine and valerian root. Both of those have some evidence to suggest that that may improve sleep quality. Now, the only thing is, when I looked at the nutrition facts, I couldn't see the quantity of valerian root that's in there. And the typical dose of valerian root is 450 milligrams. So I would have liked to see that it actually had that amount in there, the minimum effective dose. I don't think it would hurt to try, but again, I think the starting point would be go to the grocery store, pick up some of the Ocean Spray or whatever brand you choose. I figured the Ocean Spray is probably the cheaper end. And then add that in 8 to 12 ounces 2 times a day, and that may help with recovery. Questions?
No questions so far.
Cool. Let's talk about sleep. Okay, sleep. So this is a hard topic for firefighters, right? So here's the thing. I'm going to make some recommendations. I'm going to make some statements about the research for sleep in firefighters. And I want to just start this off with, I understand like the job makes it very hard to sleep. Like shift work in general destroys people's sleep. And a lot of times it can be very discouraging to try and work towards this, especially if you're a busy person. Say like you have kids, you might have a side job, a long commute, other responsibilities, mandatory overtime, mandatory holds that make it even harder to do this, to get the sleep that you need in, especially when you're lacking time. But what I want to get is basically, this is something you need to prioritize, because this is going to this will extend your life, but also the quality of your life. Because the goal is, yes, firefighting is an amazing career, but the goal is to milk the county for as much money as you can in retirement, and not see issues 3 years after you retire, right? You want to be able to maximize the quality of your life after your retirement, right? And then also how you feel day to day, right? So now let's talk about sleep in firefighters. In a study of almost 7,000 firefighters, it found that 37%, over a third of firefighters have a sleeping disorder. Over a third. Okay, so 1 in 3 firefighters have a sleeping disorder. Almost 1 in 4 firefighters have a sleeping disorder. And 80% of those firefighters that they studied had no prior awareness of the sleeping disorder, right? So this could include sleep apnea, insomnia, restless leg syndrome, all of those kinds of things. Which is concerning because there are a lot of major consequences to sleep deprivation. Number one, mental health. So if you are typically, if someone is maybe not ready to talk to a provider, and while that's not my preference, the first thing we work with, if there seems to be symptoms of PTSD, depression, anxiety, which there are 3 times as likely with sleep deprivation, we actually focus on sleep. And part of the mechanism or the understanding of this higher risk for PTSD, depression, anxiety 3 times as much when you're sleep deprived is the brain cannot decouple the memory of tragic events and the physiological response that comes with those memories. So basically, it's kind of like your brain's way of sleep is your brain's way of taking out the trash And if you can't sleep on some of these things, it's going to be hard to get over it. Now, I just want to clarify, like, it's going to be very hard to do this on duty because the community and all of that kind of thing. But that is one of the big reasons. It helps you recover from some of these traumatic events. Another concern too with the sleep deprivation is there's a 1.4 increase in likeliness to commit suicide, and that's regardless of depression. So again, chronic sleep deprivation does increase the risk or concern for those mental health disorders. Another thing that sleep deprivation can do is it reduces your immunity, which not good for COVID, not good for, in general, the flu and all of these sinus infections that keep going around, especially if you have kids, good Lord. The other thing that gets people interested is the metabolic effects. So I think the research that I've seen is about a 3 to 5% reduction in overall basal metabolic rate. That's not a terribly huge amount. It's enough to usually make people a little uncomfortable. Some of the more interesting effects of sleep deprivation is the 40% reduction in glucose tolerance. So basically they evaluated, I think this was in nurses, nurses who did not get sleep, were sleep deprived, and then had them take like an oral glucose tolerance test, like the type that women take when they're pregnant to see if, or like you take if you may have diabetes, just to see what the glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity was. 40% reduction in healthy people who were sleep deprived. That is an interesting concept, especially if you have like type 2 diabetes or you're having trouble managing that. So, that is a concern for sure, is that the reduction in glucose tolerance and how in insulin sensitivity. Now, we also know that typically when you don't sleep at night, the food choices and the caffeine choices the next day are typically not good. And this is same for a dietitian. Like if I don't sleep well the night before, the last thing I want to have is oatmeal in the morning, right? So we actually see from the numbers standpoint, we see an 18% reduction in leptin. So we see an 18% reduction in the appetite suppressant hormone. So the hormone that reduces your appetite is reduced. And then we see a 28% increase in ghrelin, which is the hormone that stimulates your appetite. So the hormone that reduces your appetite is reduced, and the hormone that increases your appetite is increased. So then we see a 24% increase in, or reported increase in hunger. So you're not crazy if you feel like you're hungry or snacky all the time when you're at a shift that doesn't get a whole lot of sleep. And I believe I think it's like First Responders Sleep Recovery. She has a lot of really good information on her website and I think her social media. And I'll make sure I look at that before that I have the right name. But again, so there are some significant impacts of sleep on our nutrition choices, and then also our mental health, which can make it harder to make healthier decisions, right? Now, typically the most control that you have when it comes to sleep is when you're off duty. And that's just the reality. I'm not going to pretend that that's an easy reality, especially if you have kids, especially if you have toddlers, side jobs, dogs that need to get walked or get up at specific hours of the day. So the biggest thing that you can start off with is trying to get a consistent sleep-wake time, which again is hard and may need to be adjusted. Like if you really got nothing and you were up all night at a fire, that sleep-wake time might be adjusted slightly. But trying to get up when you're off duty, especially for longer breaks, like if you have a 4-day break or something like that, where, you go to bed around 9 o'clock, you get up around 7 o'clock or whatever is your best sleep cycle for you or sleep times for you. But trying to keep it from being, going to bed 9 o'clock one night, then 12 a.m. the next night, and then 2 a.m. the other night, and then 9 a.m. again, trying to get that more consistent to help reset your circadian rhythms. Another big thing to pay attention to is caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. Usually that ranges between 5 and 6 hours. Alcohol typically at least 3 hours before sleep, because all three of those substances can impact your sleep cycle. Caffeine, again, as mentioned a while ago in our first chapter, caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours.
So what that means is if you have 200 milligrams of caffeine, so some coffee or an energy drink at 4 p.m., and then you go to bed at 9 p.m., you still have 100 milligrams circulating in your system to that may impact your sleep cycles. So that amount of caffeine may not impact your ability to fall asleep, but it will impact your sleep cycles. So what ends up happening is when people have caffeine too close to bedtime, or within an hour of bedtime, 2 hours of bedtime, is they end up spending less time in that deep, rapid eye movement, restorative phases of sleep, and they end up waking the next day more tired. So what do they reach for more of? Caffeine. So nicotine also is a stimulant, so that doesn't help your sleep. Alcohol, while it may help people fall asleep, a lot of people will take it because they feel like it helps them fall asleep. It really messes with sleep cycles. And a lot of times alcohol, particularly with people with PTSD, can increase some of those negative nightmares. So again, that may be something to pay attention to. Exercise can actually help improve sleep. So typically morning exercise is preferred. Usually you want to leave a couple hours between when you exercise and when you go to bed, but a lot of times that can help. Actually, so I used to do bodybuilding and I really hate cardio with a vengeance. But my Fitbit has told me before that when I get a 30-minute run in, I actually I spend more time in deep sleep, which I don't know how accurate that is, but it is motivating to have something be like, hey, you actually sleep better when you run, because then I'm like, okay, I probably should do this cardio that I really don't want to do. So, and that varies for each person. Typically cardio does help with that. Usually between 20 and 30 minutes can improve sleep, really exercise in general. And if you're not sure like where your sleep's at, then a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or a Ring, Whoop, those kinds of tech things can help you track trends. Now, are they accurate? The accuracy is not great on these. However, I think it's a tool because it also will tell you like when you fell asleep, what time. It can be a way for you to kind of track trends. It may not be accurate, but at least you can be like, you can know, you went to bed later that day, or maybe when you drink, you have my sleep cycles are worse if I have any alcohol, even if it's one drink or five. Actually, five doesn't happen for me, but it does tell me that my sleep is worse. So it can help you again, just figure out what works best for you. Now, another thing with sleep is that sleep environment makes a huge difference. Again, this is probably an off-duty thing, but blackout shades are great. They now have at Costco, if you haven't been to Home Depot or Lowe's for window treatments lately, the accordion shades are amazing and they're not that expensive typically for some of the smaller windows. They're usually like $30, $40. For a bigger custom window, it's going to ring you up for more than $100, but they have a lot of custom shades at Home Depot and Lowe's, and they just have a button that you can pull up and down. You don't have, not the automated ones, the fancy automated ones, you have to marry rich for those. But those blackout accordion shades are way better almost than the curtains, at least in my experience. I mean, some curtains do really well, but eliminating light from the room makes a big difference, especially coming off shift and if you have to sleep like during the day. Another big thing are earplugs. Now, earplugs, I guess with people with kids, this can be a little bit more challenging, but if you can, even when you're at home, earplugs can help, especially if you have like dogs or animals where they start scratching at themselves in the middle of the night. That can help prevent you from waking up. So earplugs could be something that you could add in, especially if you're traveling or you have, like I said, dogs or cats or something like that. The other big thing that I want to notice or want you to note is you should really the recommendation is to avoid lights and screens 2 hours before bedtime. And that is really hard to do with TVs and tablets and phones, and a lot of people like scrolling through, I know for me, it's scrolling through Facebook and seeing what people are up to is a way that they like wind down for the night, right? So one thing you can do if you are not going to avoid the screen is switch your phone to night shift. So you can see in the bottom left corner the two colors of the screens. What night shift will do, and usually it's in the brightness or the display section of your phone in settings, night shift will shift the coloring of the light emitted from the screen to a more orangey yellow hue, which is less assaulting on melatonin, the hormone that helps make you sleepy. So again, that we would shift over to that yellowish hue. Typically your phone can do that on a timer. I personally just have it on the night shift like throughout the whole day. But again, you can put it on a timer and that may help with sleep a little bit. But again, you're trying to avoid those screens. Other big things is establishing a routine, just like you would with, little kids, the bath, the read the book, and then you put them to bed kind of thing. Having that as an adult starts to get harder and harder, especially as you're running around with more responsibilities. But it could be things like stretching or yoga, light physical therapy exercises to help your shoulder or your back or whatever. Reading a book, like an actual book or magazine, taking a shower, figuring out a way that can give you a routine can help with this. The challenge is that some of these recommendations take time, and it's hard to make that time when you already feel overwhelmed. So starting somewhere, maybe with one of these recommendations, may help your sleep. Some other things. So if you are still struggling with sleep, what I would suggest is on your own is take the PSQI, which is this is not the picture of the PSQI, this is a sleep diary, but the PSQI, there's a link in the PDF, is a sleep form that usually sleep professionals, mental health providers will have people go through to see if they're having any challenges with sleep. So sometimes going through one of these forms can help you determine like, oh, this is actually an issue, because a lot of times what first responders will do, or people in general who are busy, will just be like, okay, like my sleep is not good. I don't feel very good, but I'm just getting older. Like that, I work shift work. Like I'm just going to be tired for the rest of my life. And that doesn't have to be the case. And taking one of these screenings can help you determine if it's time to actually consult a sleep professional or a mental health specialist. And the other thing with the sleep professional thing, during COVID, they got a lot better at the home tests. So you could do a home test for things like sleep apnea and some other sleep disorders. So you don't have to go to these like cold and sterile places and sleep there for the night and make it a whole thing. The other thing is too, like sleep apnea, if you're snoring, if the docs have measured your neck and they're like, hey, this is starting to creep up in terms of size, a lot of times when people get on the CPAP for sleep apnea, their sleep improves so drastically that they never go back. And the machines have gotten a lot more quiet. So if you're nervous about that, I think it will make a big difference in your life. So consider, again, if you're snoring a lot and it's a new thing, maybe talking to a professional. Now, typically before you're talking to a professional, if you're really on top of things, ideally having a sleep diary before can really help. I know for me as a provider for nutrition, when someone shows up with a food log, it makes my recommendations a lot easier and a lot quicker. So this sleep diary specifically from the Sleep Foundation, they have a PDF. You can keep it next to your bed and you can just kind of fill out how you slept that week or that week. So that way, when you go see a provider, you have something in front of them to actually look at and give specific recommendations or needs for certain testing and that kind of thing. All right, now for the unpopular opinion of the day. So let's talk about on-duty sleep strategies. Now, I don't know how it is at CAL FIRE, with sleep, like safety naps. I've heard them called operational readiness drills. And I know the perception for a lot of departments is that the community is not going to want you to nap on duty, right? You should not be napping. You should be working and getting things done and da-da-da-da. And actually, there have not been any studies done on public perception on public safety officers doing or taking naps. And there's a really good article, which I links below, about public safety being able to nap on duty, and it goes over all the pros and cons in nitty-gritty detail with evidence. Now, here's what the research shows for these like safety naps or these operational ready drills. I've worked with counties where they call it operational readiness drill because it makes them sound like they're doing more than napping. But the reality is we see fewer lapses in performance. So if you're seeing a lot of these like weird injuries or lapses in performance tick up, particularly at stations that are starting to get more calls, maybe due to increases in population or decreases in staffing and that kind of thing, safety naps can help with that. It can also help relieve sleep and fatigue. It can reduce feelings of anxiety. It helps with post-shift recovery, which is super key because a lot of, especially for us, we do the NOVA schedule with tours and it's on, off, 4-day. You know, that can help with the recovery from those shifts. It may also reduce burnout. So that could be a strategy in departments that are a little bit overloaded. Again, not a popular opinion, but it may help. Now, I also understand this can be dependent on the department, and it can also be dependent on the officer unless there's an SOP in place that states that you're able to do napping. Might be an unpopular opinion, but if you're an officer, I highly recommend reading this to see if this is an option. A lot of times the stations that I've seen who do naps are the stations who know they're going to be up at night. They know the community is kind of one of those sleeper communities where there's going to be between 2 and 5 calls after midnight, and that is just how it's going to be. The days are a little slower, so they end up taking some naps so that they can be at their optimal performance and give an optimal service in the evening. Not a popular opinion, but something to think about. Now, with the napping, what are some strategies that we can do to improve sleep, or what are optimal nap strategies? Typically, we want to go with 20 minutes or 90 minutes. So a 20-minute nap is more like resting your eyes and resting your brain and focusing on breathing. My suggestion is going with like a box breathing technique where you're inhaling for 4 seconds or 4 counts. You hold for 2 seconds or 2 counts, and then you exhale for 4 seconds and hold for 2. And it's kind of like a box, right? And you're trying to breathe more into your stomach. So pushing air into your stomach instead of into your chest in like shallow breathing. So you're trying to do deep stomach breathing to help relax and pull you into a parasympathetic response so that when you wake up, you're more refreshed. Now, this 20-minute nap is not intended to give you like deep restorative sleep. It is, again, a way to kind of help re-regulate your nervous system and give your brain a little bit of a break. So typically, there are 4 phases of sleep. There's awake, light sleep, rapid eye movement, and deep sleep. And usually you go through all 4 phases of this sleep in about 90 minutes. That 20-minute nap is going to keep you in awake/light-ish sleep, but it's not going to put you into the rapid eye movement or deep phases, and that's what you want. Because usually if you're woken up during our REM or deep phases of sleep, you're going to wake up cranky. You know, when you wake up from a call and you're like want to punch someone in the face and you're super irritable, that's why we keep such a gap between 20 minutes and 90 minutes, is we're trying to prevent you from falling asleep. If you fall asleep, like deep sleep that quickly, that is an indication that you may need to, again, talk to a sleep health professional. Now, you may notice, Megan, you said that we should not do caffeine before sleeping. Now, there is one way that you can do caffeine before sleeping, and it's called a nappuccino. And this is only going to work for short instances of sleep, like a 20-minute nap. So you would do, about 12 ounces of coffee or roughly 150 to 200 milligrams of caffeine, and then go lay down for 20 minutes. And basically by the time you wake back up or you open your eyes again, the caffeine has gotten into your system and you have the benefit of the brain break plus the caffeine. So it can help with feeling more alert without a whole lot of time. So a great way to get a little nap in. And so the last nap strategy is your 90-minute sleep cycle. So again, you're going through all 4 phases of sleep. And this can either be for like a longer instance of sleep or if you're planning your sleep cycles. So usually it's about an hour and a half, 3 hours, 4.5 hours, 6 hours, 7.5 or 9 hour sleep periods when possible to help optimize you going through all those phases of sleep. So again, wouldn't do caffeine, alcohol, nicotine before these longer sleep cycles, but the caffeine before the 20-minute nap may have a little bit of an added benefit. Any questions?
No questions.
Ooh. All right. So, last few things that I wanted to talk about. So, because we were talking about sleep, I think the reality of shift work is the fact that sometimes you just need a little midnight snack. And, you know, a lot of people get concerned about eating at night because they're worried about their metabolism. The internet told them that if they eat after 8 p.m., they will like spontaneously gain a ton of belly fat or something like that. And the challenge is like with shift work, sometimes that's when you get to eat dinner is 8 o'clock. Like you calls delayed you or whatever, or you're off duty and your kids' practices pushed you back. And the reality is you have to eat after 8. And really, like, we don't see a drastic change in metabolism for that. Like, again, a very small amount, like 3 to 5%. But the biggest challenge, I think, with the impact on sleep with eating at night is eating too much, right? So you get back from those calls, you're going to go lay down after you eat, but you inhale 3 plates, and suddenly you're like overly full, you're gassy, you're uncomfortable, and it impacts your sleep. Or you have acid reflux, and that larger meal kind of pushes up and causes more acid reflux, and that doesn't help. So when it comes to eating at night, in terms of like, say you woke up after midnight, couple calls, and you need a snack because you're physically hungry. These are some midnight snack ideas that would be healthy or options to keep on hand. You're typically looking for something high in protein and high in fiber. So like I said, a protein and a plant. And some of those options are Quaker, you could do oatmeal packets. Quaker used to have one called Quaker Weight Control, but considering the current political climate, that didn't go so well. It's now called Quaker Fiber and Protein. So this is a oatmeal that is lower sugar. It's still flavored like the maple brown sugar or whatever, and is high in protein and high in fiber. So I think it's about 10 grams of protein in one of these. I actually used to eat these a lot when I was bodybuilding because it kept me from getting hangry, and it actually felt kind of like a brick in your stomach. So it is a good option. It's not a ton of food, maybe good for 1 packet for a smaller female, up to 2 packets, 3 packets for a larger person, larger guy. But those oatmeal packets are a great option because they are flavored and they're sweet. And another good option is popcorn. So if you like crunchy, saltier foods, popcorn is a whole grain, technically. It has a little bit of fiber, about 2 grams per serving. And it also is a kind of a crunchy treat, similar to chips. But you get, for 2 cups, it's about the same calories as 7 potato chips. And I don't know about you, but the only time I eat 7 potato chips is when I'm standing in front of the cabinet looking for other things to eat. It's really easy to overdo that serving size. So popcorn, like Smart Food, Skinny Pop, those kinds of things, air popped popcorn are great options. Greek yogurt's another good one. You could do like any type of Greek yogurt, but the Oikos 000, it's high protein, no fat, and no artificial sweeteners. So it's a little sweet. It doesn't taste super chalky like regular Greek yogurts do. So it is a good alternative if you are trying to avoid the artificial sweeteners. Light and Fit is another good brand, but again, it does have the artificial sweeteners. Again, I'm not concerned with the artificial sweeteners. I just know that some of my patients are. The other cool thing with the Oikos 000 is they add a little bit of fiber. I think it's chicory root fiber to, I think, help thicken it, but that gives you an extra 5 grams of fiber from yogurt. Typically animal-based foods like dairy, eggs, meats, chicken, they don't have fiber in it, but because they added it to thicken it, you get that added bonus for the Oikos. I don't think Light and Fit does that. Other midnight snacks. Okay, well, a smoothie is not going to be a good idea if half of the shift is asleep. But if everybody's awake, smoothies are a great option. Typically, if you keep protein powder, some frozen fruit, and some milk or whatever on hand, it's pretty easy to whip up a smoothie. Protein bars can also be good, but you want to find a protein bar that tastes good to you. So my personal favorite protein bar is the Quest White Chocolate Raspberry, but that is for someone who really likes sweet. Like I could eat sugar straight if I really wanted to, but it's a very, very sweet bar, which is perfect for like in the middle of the night. It's actually something to look forward to. Some of my clients have told me that there's an Aloha bar that's like a chocolate brownie that they really like and almost have trouble not eating too many of them. But sometimes that's just like enough to get you over. I'm not, if you have like a rough call or like an actually active call, you may need more snacks than this. But if you wanted some ideas that are light and you're just eating to kind of eat, these would be good options. Turkey roll-ups are good as well, with some like low sodium deli turkey or hummus. A lot of times I'll also bring pretzel chips, but I have to have a celery or carrots with it. So I get a veggie, but I also get my chips. So giving yourself a little bit of an option there. All right. Do I have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. I'm gonna see. I think I'm gonna skip some of these slides and then get into some more tips. I don't think I went over these ones. But before I leave you, I just want to kind of go into some like shift strategies, because I'll go for another like 5 or 10 minutes. But like I said, some of the big things that we're trying to focus on are a plant-focused diet. Now, plant-focused, a lot of people automatically assume that means that it's plant-based. And that's really not what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at, we need more plants in our diet, again, because of the antioxidants and the fiber. And the way to do that is as many vegetables as possible, which is my adage, AMVAP. I like as many reps as possible that the CrossFitters do. It's trying to get as many veggies in as you can. So, excuse me, a lot of the recipes that I have either on my website or I write for Palm Beach Gardens has veggies hidden in there. So I love green smoothies because if you put a handful of spinach in a smoothie with protein powder and fruit, you're not going to taste the spinach. So it's a great way to get a fruit and a vegetable before you're even awake in the morning, and you don't have to chew it. The other thing that I like is adding a handful of coleslaw veggies in wraps or sandwiches because it adds texture, and it's a pre-cut veggie at the grocery store for $1. Plus, it's cabbage. So coleslaw veggies are cabbage and carrots. Cabbage is a cruciferous vegetable, which is great for cancer prevention as well. So, but of course, shredding a cabbage is a huge pain in the butt manually. So it's nice that it's pretty affordable and cheap to buy at the grocery store, already pre-shredded. Other things, the 80-20 rule is kind of how I personally live my life. And it seems like a lot of my clients who want to, at least long-term, have healthy habits stick to. Because I know I've nagged about fruits and vegetables from a recovery standpoint, from a general health standpoint. But the reality is sometimes you want to have ice cream or pizza or baked goods or whiskey or bourbon or whatever your favorite food is. And it should fit into your diet, because the reality is when we cut out all of our favorite foods, typically what you want the most is those things. So when you finally get your hand on those things after not having them for a while, it's very easy to overeat, which can lead to discomfort, and then just kind of fall off and then just eat whatever you want and end up losing all that progress. When we incorporate that in, where 80% of the time you're trying to do the fruits and the vegetables, the nuts and seeds, the lean meats, those kinds of things, and then sprinkle in some of the fun foods, it makes the diet more sustainable and consistent long term. So if you've been struggling with yo-yo dieting, cutting out carbs is probably not your best bet, or eliminating all of your favorite things is probably not a great idea, just because it tends to lead to going boom right into the other direction. So, and sometimes working with a professional makes it easier to determine like how much should I do of this. But the way it works for me is I have ice cream every night because I have feelings at night, and ice cream makes me feel better. But if I'm at work, you're not going to see me, picking up cookies or stuff out on the counter. One, because people will make fun of me, and two, because I prefer to eat healthier throughout the day and then save my treat for when my willpower is the lowest, and that's typically at night. So for some people, that might be a 2:00 treat or something like that. So again, while I may be pushing more fruits and veggies, more omega-3s, more water, more of those things into your diet, it doesn't mean that you can't fit in those things that you really do like, even if they're not the healthiest option available. Okay, so another way that we can think of this is the plate method. And basically what I'm trying to do is, this is actually a picture of my plate when I did a 24-hour shift with one of our busier stations in Gaithersburg. And Granted, they were on their best behavior because the dietitian was there. So typically you want to start your first plate off with veggies because, again, I know a lot of first responders kind of inhale their food, but if we can get more veggies in on your first plate, chances are it's going to get you a little bit more full and force you to slow down a little bit because it's harder to chew that much salad and that kind of thing. But again, it'll help fill you up with fiber and water through veggies. So that first plate, typically we're trying to get those veggies in as much as you can, with a quarter of the plate being some sort of protein and a quarter being some sort of carbohydrate. Now, granted, I know the reality here of this split or of this plate is this is for a 5 foot tall female or 5'6" female. And that's probably not most of my fire service, right? So if you are getting up and getting another plate, if you're more active, more carbs may be necessary, so go for that. If you're less active, you're light duty, we might pull back on the carbs a little bit just because we're trying to pull back on calories in general, but not eliminating them entirely because they still are important for brain health, function, and performance. So again, typically any sort of veggie it can be salad, it can be frozen veggies, it can be canned if they're rinsed. I will even take fruit if you'll do fruit. Salsas count. Whole grains, ideally when you do grains, we're trying to do most of them whole, whether that's brown rice, whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, oats, quinoa, peas, potatoes, those kinds of things. And also just a note on the rice. So I've had a lot of debates about white rice and brown rice in the fire service. Really, it's getting really dark in here. So white rice versus brown rice. The reality is, from a nutrition perspective, brown rice is healthier than white rice, primarily because it's higher in B vitamins and fiber because it kept part of the bran, where white rice, they pulled off the bran entirely. So it's more of a refined grain. However, the reality of working in a fire department or even meal prepping at home is a 20 to 30 minute difference in cooking time for these rices. And also, like, if you're a person who grew up eating white rice culturally, it is very hard to get, a person who grew up eating that to switch over to brown rice because of the texture change. So what my suggestion is if you really want to do white rice, but you want to make it healthier and add more fiber in, is for every cup, add about a 4th cup of cauliflower rice. So you're doing cauliflower rice. It doesn't mean you have to chop up a bunch of cauliflower. You can buy it from the grocery store in the freezer section. So you can just take a 4th cup out of the frozen bag, tie up the bag, and then add that 4th cup of rice, heat it up and mix it in there. When you add a 4th cup or even up to a 1/2 cup of frozen cauliflower rice into regular rice, because it's not as much, you're not going to notice it texture-wise and taste-wise, and you didn't lose any time making it. So again, if you want to still do the white rice, but you want to change it up from a nutrition perspective, try adding in a little bit of cauliflower rice and seeing if you can notice it, and then gradually add a little bit more in. That way you get the fiber, it boosts the nutrient content up a little bit, but you still get that texture and taste of your normal white rice. Okay. All right. 2 more tips and then I'm done. So now busier stations, these are just some tips. Usually this is what I give to our recruits when they're about to go into 24-hour shifts or 48 hours. We do 24 hours in our area. Now, typically we usually see weight gain or weight loss at these busier stations. Weight gain is if you're doing poor choices because your energy is too low, or weight loss because people just forget to eat, which they do exist. It's few and far between, but usually you want to pack a lot of options so that you have healthier things on hand. If you show up to the firehouse with no healthy choices as snacks or things available for you, you're going to eat what's available. What's available is probably cookies and cakes and treats and stuff on the counters. What's available is wherever your driver ends up taking you to for lunch. And if they're going to Five Guys, so are you. So when you pack some of these things, it can be a helpful option. It just requires forethought, which is a challenge, if you have other things going on. A lot of times what I recommend is wraps for lunch. And there's a buffalo chicken wrap that I posted for Palm Beach Gardens that I usually do at a lot of my station visits, because usually if it tastes like a wing, you guys will listen to me. And that's a great option for lunch, and it's portable. So if you have a training and you're stuck out of the station, you have something to eat. From a workout standpoint, Some people prefer to work out on duty and some people prefer to work out off, just depending on how busy it is. If it's one of those places you're on a medic unit that's just getting their butt handed to them, it might be a recovery day. And really, it's not even a recovery day, technically. It's just, it might be a day where you walk on the treadmill. So the challenge is, like, for us, we have an SOP that requires fitness on duty at some point. You have 3-hour window to get it in, and it's required. So a lot of times it might just be a lighter workout for those busier stations. Now, for our slower stations, typically we see weight gain because people are eating out of boredom or stress or something like that. So my suggestion is, with that, again, you want to pack and have a lot of options, but also you may have to snack a little bit less. And trying to make it a rule to eat only what you bring. The wraps are always a good idea for my rural stations, because if you only get 2 calls a day, but the turnaround time is between 2 and 3 hours, that having a portable lunch option can save you from a hanger standpoint. Walking or getting active housework can also help you, distract yourself a little bit. It's just sometimes having the energy to do those things. All right. So it is almost 5:30 in Baltimore. I think that means 2:30 over where you guys are. But it was so great to do these we've done three presentations for you guys. I hope you enjoyed them. There will be a survey that goes out, and I would love your candid feedback so that I can improve these in future presentations. If you have questions for me that you would rather answer via email, my email is meganlautz@gmail.com. If you like social media and you want to see posts specific to firefighters, rescue.rd is my handle on Instagram, Facebook, and unfortunately now TikTok. And that recipe book is for specifically for station dinners, is available on my website for free. It's 27 recipes with $5 to $6 a head for shifts of 6, 10, and 14. So any questions?
I don't see